Named and shamed. India's most powerful men are accused of sexual misconduct. But why are some claiming to be the ones under attack? I'm Imran Gavda, and today's Newsmaker is India's Me Too moment. From Bollywood superstars to politicians, women across India are calling out their alleged abusers. It's been hailed as India's Me Too moment and includes accusations against senior government figures. MJ Akbar, a minister for the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party or BJP, has resigned. Akbar still denies he's done anything wrong. In fact, he's suing one of his accusers for defamation. But while the movement gains momentum, its critics say men are losing their careers and reputations without any actual proof being provided. For more, here's Sandra Gatman.
If you thought the Me Too movement had reached its peak, think again.
This is the reality of our country.
The sexual harassment solidarity hashtag is exploding in India. It started in late September after Bollywood actor Tanushree Dutta spoke out about a former co-star, Nana Patekar.
This is not a recent revelation. This is something that I've been standing up for the last 10 years. In 2008, I was shooting for this movie called Horn OK Please, and I was harassed on set by Nana Patekar. They even called the Manse party to come and attack me. There was a mob lynching situation that I had to also face.
Today, Patekar still denies the allegations. But the outrage has spilled out of Bollywood. Mahima Kugreja has accused a fellow comedian of sending sexually explicit photographs.
And sometimes the only word she is allowed to speak is silence.
Some of India's most senior journalists have also become tangled in scandal. And at the very top, MJ Akbar, a junior foreign minister and former writer, has been accused by more than a dozen female journalists of sexual misconduct. On Wednesday, Akbar resigned. All the accused have denied any wrongdoing, while some critics have dismissed the Me Too movement for digging up the past and resorting to what they call trial by the media. The online reach of the Me Too movement has spread beyond India's big cities. Google searches show women all over the country have chimed in with their own stories.
It's not an isolated crime. They're all linked together.
Analysts say it's resonating in a country where sexual violence is pervasive. National statistics reveal that a woman is raped every 13 minutes, but few attackers are ever convicted.
These cases are repeating themselves, which reflect a culture of impunity that exists in our country.
Human Rights Watch says that while India has made strides in introducing new anti-harassment laws, a report from 2017 found there are persistent gaps in enforcing the laws, relevant policies, and guidelines aimed at justice for victims of sexual violence. Given the immense lag in progress, skeptics wonder whether the Me Too hashtag has the momentum to force any meaningful change. The online discussion so far has even failed to elicit a response from India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Bengaluru is journalist and writer Sandhya Menon. She's been credited with reinvigorating the Me Too movement after sharing her own story of harassment. And from New Delhi is Udit Raj. He's a member of parliament for the ruling BJP. I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers. Sandhya Menon, let me begin with you. We have this resignation of MJ Akbar. Is that a victory for you? How important is it?
It's hugely important. I understand he's a junior minister, but he is hit Priya Ramani, who was the first one to come out with an allegation, with a defamation suit. And I think all of us understand that a defamation suit is a scare tactic, something to threaten and shut voices of truth, and I'm going to say truth, voices of truth down. And him being, the government hasn't taken any stand on its own, right? And him stepping down as a minister is a huge victory and sends a message to two people. One, those who are considering filing accusers for defamation, and those of us who have accused and who are fighting for this movement, that we can get this done, and we are serious. We're just not limited to talking about it on social media. But it's a hugely encouraging step for us to say, okay, now we need to go farther and walk through due process to make spaces safer and to have legislative change and policy change.
Okay, so Udit Raj, MJ Akbar's resignation, was it the right thing to do?
Let me tell you whole perspective. That is what I said, that if you are going to interview as a member of parliament, I will not give my interview. Yes, as a Dalit activist, as a human rights activist, as a citizen of the country, I'm here to talk about this issue. Okay?
I'm sorry, I don't see what the problem is. I introduced you and your title, and I'm asking you a question. Udit Raj resigning, was that the right thing to do?
That is what I'm telling you, is that there is no doubt about. I'm not going to speak about that because of the fact that I'm not a authorized person from the party to speak about the party. Because there are the spokesperson in the party to speak about the party and politics. I am not in that capacity unless the party authorizes me. I cannot speak. I cannot say anything about the politics. But as far as this issue is concerned, I have my perspective is that I do not deny there is no discrimination against the women. There is no discrimination against Dalit, untouchables. There is a huge discrimination. And what I said is that there is a casting couch, of course, men force sex on them and they ask for sexual favor. What I have a take is that mere statement, whether verbal or written, if it is treated as a judgment to punish somebody, then what is the use of policing system and judicial system? And one. And second is that in a room, two people meet, man and woman, what happens inside the room and who's witnessing? And without any evidence or witness, one cannot reach a conclusion. That is what I have to say.
But that's, even the law disagrees with that, Udit Raj, to say that one cannot reach a conclusion. If one party says that it was not consensual, we look at evidence and we look at the surrounding issues here. We can't just say that because nobody else was there, there's no way to actually find out what happened. You would accept that even legally, right?
How can you? Anybody can go for a personal score. It can be planted. I am in a public. I meet 300 people. I have come across many such cases where the cases are motivated. I know it. How can you say like this?
Okay, so Udit Raj, can I ask you a question? Sir, if you don't mind.
One gender is fair and one gender.
Sir, do you have a daughter?
Justice.
Sir, do you have a daughter?
Not a system of.
Do you have a daughter, sir?
Sorry?
Do you have a daughter?
I have a daughter.
Okay. So allow me to ask this question. If your daughter said she was raped by someone and there was nobody else there, would you accept it as an argument that, well, there was nobody else in the room, so there's no way we can verify, so it's his word against hers?
If she comes to tell me after 10 years and 5 years, I will slap her. Why didn't you say at that time?
Okay, that's interesting.
Second,
after 5 or 10 years,
let me tell you, there should be medical tests.
Okay.
And
so after
there should be time frame. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. What are you talking about? Revealing after 40 years, 30 years? Then of course nobody is safe in the world.
Okay, this is
Anybody
interesting.
Can be implicated.
So let me ask Sanjay Menon about this. Sanjay, what does this say about those who say, I mean, we have Udit Raj, an MP, saying, hey, if you do not come forward immediately, then your entire testimony is disregarded. Okay, so Sandhya.
After December, 40 years.
Okay, Sandhya, address that.
40 years. After 40 years.
Go ahead, Sandhya.
I have just one thing to say to Mr. Raj. I don't know if he's actually spoken to women. I don't know if he has friends who are women. I don't know if his wife and his daughter trust him. to talk about how they feel after assault or after a certain incident of harassment. But the first few things that women don't come forward is exactly the attitude that Mr. Raj is displaying right now, which is no one else was there. How will I believe you? Let's dump this, right? That's precise. If when I come and say there's no evidence, it doesn't have to be rape, right? Rape has medical evidence. You could go to a hospital and get all of that sorted. But if, like in my case, I was forcibly kissed or I was forcibly touched without my consent, and there is no evidence for it, does that mean that that's one of the first things that stops me, saying how will I go forward and prove to somebody that this happened to me? And Mr. Raj talks about there are many cases of false accusations to settle scores and to, I don't know, play whatever games.
I have evidences. I can give you evidences. I can give you evidences.
Excellent. I'm glad you have evidence. I'm glad you have evidence, Mr. Raj, but I'm not talking to you right now. Can I just finish what I'm saying?
Whatever.
I'd like him to look at. I'd like to look at.
In case of.
I will not speak.
Okay, Mr. Raj, give her a second. Mr. Raj, give her a second.
In living relationship,
Mr. Raj,
they have lived together months and years together happily, on agreement. After that, it becomes a rape.
Hold on, Mr. Raj.
Many people are languishing in the jail.
Mr. Raj, give Sandhya Menon a chance.
I'm independent.
Sandhya, go ahead.
I'd like him to look up the statistics of how many numbers stack up against, and how many numbers of false accusations stack up against genuine accusations of assault and harassment. There is no question that there are fewer cases of false accusations as opposed to real cases of harassment. This doesn't even count. And he comes from a generation where women are not believed and women are shown their place constantly. And I refuse to even engage in a manner without being angry. It's hard for me to engage with this man without being angry at what he's saying. I haven't, by the way, none of us have kept quiet. We all tell our friends, we all tell our husbands, boyfriends, fathers, and they all tell us it's okay, work through it. We live in a world where rules are set by men, just like Mr. Raj. There is no space for us. We're claiming that space right now.
Okay.
And the rule is
by
set
the
by
way,
you.
I'd like to see.
Then
okay, come in,
Indian Evidence Act is scrapped. The Constitution is scrapped. Indian Evidence Act is scrapped. Indian Penal Code is scrapped. Policing system is thrown to the dustbin. Judicial system is thrown to dustbin. There is no evidence. Mere verbal
I'd like to say something here.
The evidence.
I'm sorry. Can you please let me speak? I'd like to state here that even evidence of having finished this, gone through a certain instance of harassment, going out and talking to a superior, a friend, someone at the place of work, and saying, hey, this happened to me 1 hour ago, 1 day ago, that counts as corroborative evidence. All right, and that is taken into consideration beautifully in the court of law. As far as due process is concerned, Mr. Raj, are you saying that due process works for women? I will tell you about the Tarun Tejpal case. It was in a fast track court. It was supposed to take 8 months. It's 5 years right now.
My personal credential and my Lok Sabha. You can never be ahead of me as far as feminism is concerned, as far as standing with the women is concerned. You can check my credential. And you people are keeping quiet on Sabrimala, where the women are struggling for, agitating for their slavery. Many of the women, they are preventing other women that they should not enter. These are the larger issues. Why
I'm sorry, these are not larger issues.
These are the larger issues.
You're derailing the conversation, Mr. Raj. These are not larger issues. These are issues as large as the ones we're fighting. You're telling me working in a safe space, at a place of work, your daughter being entitled to
get survey your credential, my credential. Get survey your credential, my credential. I'm more feminist than anybody here. What are you talking about? Come to my constituency. Come the people around me. But innocent people should not be punished. Innocent people should not be punished. There are cases of honey trap. There are cases of money extortion. There are cases of living relationships. Living relationships are misused.
Okay, Udit Raj, let me ask you. If we can take a breath here, Udit Raj, let me ask you, do you believe that there is a problem that needs to be solved, or do you not think that there's a problem at all?
There is a problem. At the outset, I said, there women are exploited in workplace. There is a casting couch. Many men are like a wolf. They, of course, whole women as a gender, as a class, is excluded from religious, economic, health, education system.
Sandhya, one of the criticisms of Me Too in general, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in India and elsewhere, is that when it's a single movement under a single hashtag, sometimes all the experiences tend to sort of melt into the same thing. So people then stop distinguishing between some guy who might just be a jerk, who says, I need hot women for my movie, versus somebody who might... Hold on, Mr. Raj, can I please ask the question? Please, please, please. So, Sandhya, between somebody who says, oh, I need hot women for my movie, versus somebody who actually says terrible things to women, versus somebody who touches somebody and might have harassed them, versus somebody who might actually physically assault and maybe even, rape someone. So what happens is they all sort of get lumped together and stirred in the same pot. Would you accept that, especially with the digital world and with things like Twitter, there's a tendency for this type of thing to happen? Is that a fair criticism, Sandhya?
An absolutely fair criticism, which is why I think all of us have insisted that some of us keep the voice of harassment at workplace going and keep that message strong, right? So that we don't mix a bad date, we don't mix assault, we don't mix a friend who doesn't know how to behave himself with being assaulted at work. For instance, me and a couple of others have kept our messaging extremely strong, saying we're only talking about cases that have that are of harassment at workplace. Some others have taken up causes of just better behaved men. And I think that's a great approach, and it is fair criticism. I mean, I think it all comes from the fact that there is no place to go for women. And like I keep saying, and all of us keep saying, due process has failed us. And therefore, this is one way to go about it.
I support her.
Okay, so Mr. Raj, how about, rather than seeing this as being something that's trying to replace due process with a kind of mob justice, how about you see it, as so many other activists are seeing it, as something that gives an impetus, as something that gives momentum for due process to finally take women seriously when they say something bad happened? It's not replacing it, it's giving it a push until it gets to the courts.
See what happened. At the outset itself, I said, I'm not denying. I think I'm more sensitive than others. My heart bleeds how women are exploited in this country. And in religious sphere, they have been kept away. What is happening in Sabrimala? And they are considered impure in this society. Menstruating women are considered impure in society. My own mother was enjoying slavery at my home. There is a documentary on me, and where I have accepted it that my mother used to enjoy slavery. Women enjoy slavery. Slaves enjoy slavery because they live in false consciousness. There is no denying the fact. What happened is that now there was a time when every 10, 15 years in every offices, corporate, even government, there used to be preference for girl receptionists. Now they are out. One. Second, now I often hear in public domain that no, we will not do any partnership or business with women. This is what I'm saying. And third, that the men control economic world, religious world, social world, and educational world. All walks of life are controlled by them. This is a very unfortunate or pathetic situation in India. And of course, there are decadent culture, there are traditions, all festival, traditions, culture, mostly to exploit women. And women here are said that they are respected, they are worshipped. I say that don't worship them. Give them share in the economy. Give them power. They give them equality. And my heart bled it. And okay. I've been 2-3 days in Sabrimala. Women are struggling. I have read the global. I okay. know the world history, Greek history, Roman history, European history, Far Eastern. no section has fought for its slavery. But today, what is happening in Sabrimala, thousands of women are fighting for their slavery, that women should not be allowed to enter the Sabrimala. This is the state of affairs.
Okay, Mr. Raj.
This is the constitutional level, that which section in the world has ever fought for its slavery. This is happening in this country.
Mr. Raj.
And unfortunately, let me tell you, political parties are supporting.
Okay, and listen, I think near the end of this,
I'm so disappointed.
Okay.
I'm so disappointed.
And I thank you for that.
I don't think that I don't see any light coming in this country.
Okay.
That
Mr. Raj,
people.
I understand you fully, but I really have to move on now. Okay, so I really have to move on. And I'm glad on some of the sort of underlying cultural issues, I think the two of you agree on most of it. There was more disagreement at the beginning here, but this is a conversation that needs to continue, and we look forward to having you both back on the program sometime soon. Sanjay Menon and Udit Raj, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the program, the UN warns of a climate change catastrophe unless we take drastic action. Will the world take notice? And is Harvard failing in its admissions process? The Ivy League school faces accusations of bias against Asian Americans. From melting polar ice caps to intensified drought, they're all a result of climate change. And if the UN's latest report is anything to go by, things are only going to get worse. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, found that unless we limit global temperature rises to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, the impact could be catastrophic. Millions could lose access to fresh water, and some islands, like the Maldives, could actually disappear as sea levels rise. But there's still hope. The IPCC says that if swift action is taken, we can make things right. But who are we? And should nations be forced into better environmental practices? That debate in a moment. But first, here's Randolph Nogel.
Je n'entends pas d'objection. L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
It was seen as a landmark moment in fighting global warming. The Paris Climate Accords set an international goal of limiting a rise in global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. But that was quickly dismissed as unattainable.
At the end of the century, the temperature in average around the world will increase by at least 3 degrees and maybe more. So there's no way we can achieve the goals that we set up in the Paris Agreement.
And for countries on the front lines of climate change, like Bangladesh, there was concern from the start that the Paris Accords wouldn't be enough.
Bangladesh desperately needed an agreement of some sort where the world converges into something meaningful. It's weak on implementation. There is mention of funding, but there is no mention who is going to pay this fund, when and how, who is going to receive it, when and how.
Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, says the international community has just 12 years to limit a climate change catastrophe.
Carbon dioxide emissions would need to decline substantially before 2030 to avoid warming of more than 1.5 degrees C in the middle of the 21st century, followed by large-scale carbon dioxide removal.
Their report says the difference between a 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures versus 1.5 is billions more people having access to water and having losses of crops and plants. But carbon emissions would need to be cut globally by almost half in the next 12 years. In the past, the IPCC has been criticized as being too conservative in consolidating research from the global scientific community and publishing its assessments, making its last report the most alarming to date.
Our report puts on the table a sum of knowledge, and this knowledge aims to enlighten choices and encourage actions.
But there are considerable obstacles to addressing the climate crisis, like getting the world's #2 polluter on board. Under the leadership of the Trump administration, the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Accords. President Donald Trump is skeptical of the claim that climate change is a man-made phenomenon caused by record levels of carbon dioxide pouring into the atmosphere, something broadly accepted by the scientific community.
There is something there, man-made or not. I mean, there's something there, and it's going to go, and it's going to go back and forth, but there is something there. But again, 50 years ago it was brutal. 1890s were brutal. You have different times.
According to the World Wildlife Fund, more than half of all sea life has died off in the last 40 years, in part because of rising acidity and lower oxygen levels in the oceans. And the need for relief from natural disasters, widely believed to have intensified because of climate change, is at an all-time high.
That in the 70s, we used to be dealing with 80 to 100 severe weather-related shocks and hazards. In 2017, we dealt with about 400, and that is about 4 times more.
But the forecast for the impact on future generations is most worrying.
The worst case estimates are that throughout this century, as many as 2 billion people could be driven from coastal cities and communities toward the interior of the continents on which they live.
As glaciers melt, adding hundreds of billions of tons of water into the sea each year, sea levels are rising, and extreme heat and drought, floods and poverty are becoming more prevalent. The scientific community's message is clear. Unless the world unites to take dramatic action immediately, it may be too little too late for future generations to fix the damage. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington by Mark Morano. He's the Executive Director and Chief Correspondent of Climate Depot, a project that disputes the scientific consensus on climate change. And from Florence in Italy, we have Sven Tveitel, the Chairman and Founder of Climate 2020, a climate change consultancy group. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Sven, let me begin with you. This IPCC report, it's a dire warning. Is it the sort of warning we need right now?
Definitely. It is a dire warning, and it tells us that we have very little time left if we are going to avoid catastrophic climate change in the near future.
So, Mark, we have some of the best scientists reporting to an international panel, taking this very seriously, worrying about the future of humanity, and you don't trust them. Why?
Well, for the very reason you just stated, Sven, you said some of the best scientists. These are scientists that the governments hand-pick to send to the United Nations. They're scientists, and in fact, the most recent report was written by 91 scientists, and I believe among them was Michael Oppenheimer, who's a climate activist with the Environmental Defense Fund. He's a scientist, but he's also got a serious agenda. He took $250,000 from Barbara Streisand. You have scientists that in the United Nations, which are chosen mostly for their political and ideological ability to persuade. And what I mean by that is they're only going to pick scientists that are promoting climate fears. And a simple way of summing this up is this was a group founded in 1988, the UN IPCC. Yes, it won a Nobel Prize, but it won a Nobel Peace Prize, not for science, but for peace, for political activism. So these scientists in 1988 had to come up with CO2 as a problem. If they find that CO2 is a problem, then guess what? The United Nations, who's in charge of this group, is also in charge of the solution. This is nothing more than base-level political lobbying by self-selected scientists at the United Nations. And in my new book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, I detail many of the scientists who are former United Nations scientists who turned against the UN because of its alarmism and its lobbying. It's essentially a lobbying organization masquerading as a science panel.
Let me ask you,
that's the problem here.
What's in it for them? What's in it for them if they say, hey, listen, we need to clean up our act, we need to stop polluting our skies, we need to stop burning fossil fuels, which is increasing the temperature. More than 97% of us accredited scientists believe this to be true, that we are responsible for this, right? Let me finish my question. What's in it for them? They're saying, we worry about the future of humanity. We might even have to tighten our belts and possibly even reduce our standard of living in the period before we change to alternative energy sources. It doesn't look like they're making some sort of big bonanza out of this, Mark.
They are, though. I mean, if you go back, first of all, the head of the IPCC was Rajendra Pachauri, the head for many, many years. He was forced to resign in a sexual, discrimination scandal a few years ago.
But again, you're talking about sexual discrimination, Barbara Streisand. I mean, all of this stuff. It's just word salad at the viewers here.
I'm explaining. You asked me what they have. You asked specifically what's in it for them.
Okay, so they're all doing it for one guy.
The panel, the IPCC. No. He said global warming is my religion. The United Nations is now going to be in charge of the UN Paris Agreement. They're going to be in charge of what they're, in their own words, a complete transformation of society from beginning to end, a centralized transformation. And guess who's in charge of that? The United Nations bureaucrats, planners. This is where they're in charge of distributing the climate funds to which governments are best able to keep poverty and keep energy level and emissions down. They're going to be very important players. And interestingly enough, all of these tipping points began 1864. I document that. We had professors saying we're going to have climatic doom unless we do something. And in the 1970s, we had the same warnings of doom and tipping points. We must act quickly on global cooling, on overpopulation. We've been there and done that. This is cheap bargaining where the United Nations is saying we will protect you from the climate if all these countries pay up and basically transform our current system, and we'll be in charge of the direction of it. We who believe global warming is our religion, we who they've admitted are at the beck and call of government, and an IPCC vice chair has said we will redistribute wealth by climate policy. This is not even environmental or climate policy anymore. It's redistribution of wealth. There is another agenda at play.
Okay.
You as a journalist can't be you can't be this naive about it. You cannot be this naive. You just scratch the surface of this. This is a lobbying organization trying to scare us yet again for the umpteenth time. 1989, we had a 10-year tipping point by the United Nations.
Mark, I know you're going to go on for as long as you can. Sven, let me bring you in here. One of the interesting things about this and the age within which we live is that currently the most powerful man in the world, Sven, is probably more aligned with Mark's thoughts on this issue than yours. With Mark's, than the vast majority of scientists. And the most powerful country in the world pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord as well. With all of that in mind, are you fighting a losing battle, Sven?
I don't hope so, and I don't hope so because of the humanity. When I was a director with the UN Environment Programme, I had the responsibility for the secretariat to the IPCC, together with a colleague in WMO. And what I just heard from the other person here is simply not correct. And it's good to know that almost all governments in the world is using the reports from the IPCC as a scientific basis for the climate policy they are implementing. So I think it is a big setback actually for the to achieve global climate goals, to limit warming to 2 or hopefully 1.5 centigrades, that the US has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. But most governments are back, and they will hopefully manage to do a better job than we have been doing so far, because we have very limited time left.
Okay, and Sven, the IPCC says emissions need to be cut 45% from present levels by 2030 and almost eliminated by 2050. Is that just pie in the sky, or is that actually doable in any way, shape or form? And if so, how?
Well, I have to say to that it is theoretically possible, but in practical terms, it might not work well out. We have had this knowledge for many years, and if we have started doing the right things 20 years ago, it would have been more easy to avoid the catastrophic climate change that now are in a way approaching very fast. But what we have to do, of course, all of us that believe in what the IPCC and the consensus amongst the scientists is recommending, is to work as hard as we can so that our grandchildren can have a better future than what it looks like just now.
Mark Morano, is there any amount of evidence that can be provided to you for you to accept the scientific consensus that our climate is changing, the Earth is warming, the sea levels are rising, places like the Maldives might disappear very soon, most of our coral reefs will go because of what we're doing, so please come on board so we can figure this out for our grandchildren. Is there any amount of science and evidence that can be shown to you, given that there's so much out there already?
Well, first of all, you mentioned the Maldives and the Pacific Islands. In 1988, they were supposed to be underwater by now, and that hasn't happened. In fact, they're actually, some of the islands are growing and they're building airports, and there's no sign of alarm. Here's the thing. There's nothing today that's outside the bounds of natural variability. And I talk to Nobel Prize-winning scientists. I talk to former UN scientists. And I lay this out in my book, a very simple case. Storms, hurricanes, floods, droughts, tornadoes are either at no trend or declining trends on time at climb scales. And that includes, hurricanes and other things we're worried about. Sea level is showing no acceleration. Now, there's dueling data sets. The United Nations will pick different data sets that show, but if you go by tide gauges, there's no acceleration. If you jump to satellite, there is. Temperature, so-called hottest year claims, are well within the margin of error of the data sets. In other words, they're statistically meaningless. It's a fancy way of saying the global temperature has stayed still. We have cooled since the medieval warm period. We have cooled since the Roman warming period of about 100 AD, 0 AD. So in terms of evidence, the extraordinary claims need to be provided on the other side. What the UN did in this report is they basically did a misdirection. They can't point to anything alarming happening now or anything significant. So what they do is they made a bunch of scarier and scarier predictions of the future, issued yet another ridiculous and clown talking point of tipping points. That's the problem. And by the way, the 1.5 C degree limit, one last point, is pulled from thin air. According to Hans Schullenhuber, one of the fathers of this movement, according to Jones, the climate gate scientist, the top UN scientist, he said that he thinks it was pulled from thin air. There's no scientific basis for it, and it's actually a political goal to motivate. We're back to lobbying. People are being deceived. This is a con to lobby so that you can centrally transform governments and put UN bureaucrats basically in charge of the world energy economy.
Something that's interesting for our viewers to decide is whether this is a massive con by the vast majority of scientists and nation states in the world, or if
vast majority.
There might be something at play here and we need to do something about it. Sven, I want you to address something for us very finely. For those who say our way of life is going to be disrupted, we're just trying to put food on the table, we have far more pressing issues like wars in Syria, for example, and that, to Mark's point, the Earth has gone through far more chaotic and crazy periods in the past, ice ages and so forth, so maybe we're taking ourselves too seriously. Maybe we're just going through one of those natural cycles. I want you to address that for those of our viewers who might think that way.
I teach quite a lot now for young children on schools in Norway. And I'm telling them that if you think there has been no changes on the world, I'm saying that you should have been sitting in a spaceship for 30 years and watched the ice over the Arctic. And you would have seen that it has been halved in the middle of September over a period of 30 years, which is maybe the most significant change that has been on Earth for millions of years in such a short period.
Okay. Sven Feitel and Mark Morano. Listen, I'd like to get you back on the program in the future, but I've got to wrap and move on. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you very much.
Getting into Harvard is hard enough as it is. Less than 5% of students who apply make the grade. But if you're an Asian American, apparently it's even harder. The Ivy League school has been taken to court by this man, Edward Bloom. He alleges the college pushes down the personal ratings of Asian Americans. Harvard denies discriminating against any race group. In fact, they say it can only help a candidate. Bloom is a well-known guy for his multiple legal challenges against affirmative action, and his critics doubt his intentions. They think he doesn't care about Asians, and he's just using them to further his own agenda. So, what's this really about? Well, joining me now is Janelle Wong. She's a professor of American Studies at the University of Maryland. And in Washington, D.C., we have Mike Gonzalez. He's a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Janelle, let me start with you. Are Asian Americans discriminated against by Harvard?
There's no evidence that Asian Americans are discriminated against at Harvard. In fact, Asian American admissions at Harvard have steadily increased. And we actually see that affirmative action helps Asian Americans. I think it's really a racial stereotype to assume that Asian Americans are somehow actually more qualified than other groups to get into Harvard. They're doing very well. About 20% of Harvard's incoming class is Asian American, and Asian Americans make up about 6% of the US population.
Some people, Mike Gonzalez, who are protesting against Edward Blum, feel that his issue is a sort of Trojan horse. He's using Asian Americans as a prop because what he really wants to talk about is re-entrenching the majority's control of access to these positions. He doesn't want affirmative action for minorities. He's using Asians as a bit of a prop. Would you see any justification to that? Yeah.
Let me briefly take away this Trojan horse of Edward Blum. This is not about Edward Blum. It is very telling and noteworthy that Asian Americans who still face discrimination are able to get do very well when it comes to academic criteria such as high GPA, SAT scores. I like to really push back against almost everything Professor Wong just said. This is not ethnic stereotyping. We have very good data that shows that the GPA is higher, the SAT scores are higher. Unfortunately, the data that we have is Asian Americans. Asian Americans is not very good data because it comprises many different groups with very different cultural indicators. But if you look at the hours they spend doing homework per week, much higher. And of course, they are discriminated against. Even though the evidence of that is just very long and very extensive. They are discriminated against in admissions, not just at elite schools, but at other schools. They have to score much higher in their SATs and have much higher GPAs to have the same chance of getting into an elite school as other people from other backgrounds. And it's sad, they have to hide the fact that they're Asian backgrounds. We're talking about Americans, by the way. We're talking about Americans, whether they're born here or naturalized. Americans in 2018 should be treated as Americans, plain and simple.
So you want a completely level playing field because you believe that we're at a point where society is, I guess, equal enough, Mike, for us to not have any quotas whatsoever. Is that what you want?
We cannot use race. We cannot use race as a criteria to grant a benefit or a penalty to somebody. That is not what we should be doing in the second decade of the 21st century.
Okay, interesting. So Janelle, let me get you to respond to this, but in your response, I want you to fold in your response to a little observation I have. While I was living in the United States, I came across something really interesting about white South Africans who are now American citizens, so they'd left South Africa. Their parents grew up under the old system in South Africa, arguably sort of reaped the benefits of the old apartheid system, moved to the United States at some point in the 80s or 90s or whatever, and they were ticking these boxes of being African American, and they were kind of gaming the system and getting benefits by being African American because they could show that they came from Africa and they were also American. So doesn't that give you an indication that when you start playing this game of quotas, you get a lot of people who can actually game the system? Janelle?
Packed into both of your remarks are quite a few, I think, very, very common misconceptions and misunderstandings about how admissions works. I see the headline here says racial quotas. Racial quotas have been ruled unconstitutional since 1978. You will not find a college campus that uses racial quotas that would be litigated immediately. That is not what this case is about. It's not accusing Harvard of quotas because Harvard doesn't use quotas. So I want to get that on the table right away, that racial quotas have been illegal, unconstitutional,
but let's
rights
change the word to algorithm. Let's say it's a kind of algorithm in the admissions process where race is taken into account.
Yeah, there's also bonus points and extra kind of automatic admissions based on race that's also illegal. So what is holistic admissions? Holistic admissions includes using race as one factor among many, many, many other factors. And I will push back at Mike's comments too, that affirmative action actually helps, does not hurt Asian Americans. It creates a better learning environment. It helps Asian Americans who are underrepresented in the admissions process. And so I think that there's something a little bit more nefarious at work here. And the position that Mike is supporting is really supporting the end of the consideration of race more generally in the U.S., and that's fine to take that position, but let's be real about what this case is about.
Okay, so Mike, we're hearing from Janelle that the context within which you're arguing is wrong. You think everything's fine and everybody has an equal opportunity. She's saying no. Go ahead, Mike.
I guess I'm being accused of nefarious ends. Look, we're succumbing now to an argument about semantics. And I guess, according to Professor Wong, we don't need to have a trial in Boston anymore because she assures us that Harvard is not using quotas. Of course, that is what's at stake here. If what you seek is group proportionalism in a classroom, you must use quotas. Harvard, the argument is using the same quota system that it used in the 1920s when in a very ugly way, it kept out Jewish Americans from admissions. The argument here is that that plan is very similar to this plan, and it is keeping Asians out, you know, the same way. If you seek out to have diversity and you want to have something that mirrors the base population, the group proportion of the base population, you must use quotas, which is why they're in such a bind. They're in such, and by the way, this idea that everybody will benefit from a better learning environment, in other words, that a diverse student body has educational benefits, if you peel it down, what this says is it's a really anti-rational notion that there is such a thing as racial knowledge, as group facts. No, if I am admitted into Columbia, I am not there to be an ambassador for whatever group the census and the bureaucracy in Washington says I'm in. I am not there to share my lived experience with anybody else. I'm there for the purposes of education and truth discovery. It really doesn't matter when my great-great-grandparents were born, what the pigmentation of my skin is. I am not there to share my lived experience or my group knowledge with anyone else, and that is you know, that Grutter decision notion that we can do such a thing is what leads us to where we are. Of course, the argument is that quotas are being used, and of course, it is unconstitutional.
Janelle Wong.
Yeah, so I want to just emphasize that the Heritage Foundation and Ed Blum do not speak for me. I am Asian American, and I believe that affirmative action is a very important part of really underscoring equality in the United States. So I'm not sure what the investment is that Heritage Foundation or that Ed Blum has in the Asian American population, but I will just emphasize that Asian Americans, I'm a survey researcher, Asian Americans are much more likely to support than to oppose affirmative action and race-conscious admissions. And so really this group of plaintiffs who's suing Harvard is not speaking for the Asian American community. We see a lot of support in the Asian American community, and Mike isn't speaking for the Asian American community, and nor is Ed Blum.
Mike Gonzalez.
So what you know that when you start engaging into character assassination and you start claiming there's some kind of conspiracy and you cannot argue the facts, you run out of arguments, and that is what we're seeing here. You know, I am not speaking for anybody else. I'm speaking on behalf of principles. I'm speaking on behalf of principles. Hang on, ma'am, Professor, I didn't interrupt you. I'm speaking on behalf of principles, the principles that we're all created equal, the natural right principle that we're all born free and equal, a condition we share with the rest of humanity. These are principles that I actually stand on, that I proudly proclaim. These are the principles, and I don't care what the case is, I'm going to defend those principles. And that is what is at stake here. Are we all created equal or not?
Mike, let me ask you, I mean, I don't want to presuppose where you come from, right? But like, whether you like it or not, if people consider you as a sort of Latino American expert, would that annoy you?
I am an American. It doesn't matter what my background is. It shouldn't matter. Of course, it matters in some ways. You know, I may have an affinity for a certain kind of cuisine. I may speak a language around the kitchen table. None of that matters. I am an American. I studied issues. I research issues. And no, I don't like it when I'm pigeonholed. Nobody should like it when they're pigeonholed. What we need to do in society is remove significance and expectations from identity groups. That is what Professor Wong and the other proponents of this system do not get. We need to remove expectations and significance from ethnic identities.
Okay, and so Janelle, very finally, do you respect Mike's opinion? I mean, do you expect that he has a different point of looking at this, where he wants all the sort of multiple identities to collapse into one as an American because he believes the time is now for that? Do you respect that?
Of course, I respect that people can hold different views. And I also speak as an American that cares about racial equality and racial justice. We have different ideas about how to accomplish that. I do not believe that not considering race makes any sense in America, where race makes such a difference in people's lives. That's a fundamental difference that Mike and I have. And I think a lot of Asian Americans agree with my perspective.
Okay, what Bloom has done has really opened up something really interesting. And from the outside looking at it, it's been fascinating to observe. I really appreciated you both coming onto the Newsmakers, Janelle Wong and Mike Gonzalez. I hope you'll come back to discuss this and other things with us. But for now, I have to move on. Thanks again. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, the war in Afghanistan turns 17 years old. We'll debate the upcoming elections, whether the US will ever end the war, and the role of Pakistan's new Prime Minister. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.